Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you taking time out of these very busy lives that we lead, and I appreciate you. And today it's definitely going to be worth your while. We're going to be talking with Dr. John Sottosanti, and we're going to be talking about negotiating with the love-fear dynamic. And it was something that caught my attention when I had the pleasure of meeting John recently, and I wanted to share it with you. So welcome, John. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
And for those of you who may not know him, Dr. John Sottosanti is an acclaimed surgeon, a scientist, an entrepreneur, an educator, and he's author of the bestseller Mortal Adhesions. And he led a life where he'd achieved fame and fortune, but found that they did not actually lead to that kind of sustained happiness and peace that we all hope for. And at the very depth of his despair, he discovered an ancient wisdom dating all the way back to Aristotle, which took me back to my high school days. And he used that to help find happiness and peace. And we are going to be talking today about how you can use it to get better negotiated outcomes, including your negotiations with yourself. So why don't we kickstart, John? What set you on this new path, sort of seeking that key to inner peace and happiness?
Well, I had reached a point that the success that I had found was not giving me happiness. It was actually giving me the opposite.
Yeah.
I had so much success. I was so busy. I was so stressed out. And I began having back problems, neck problems,
Yeah.
and insomnia. And I finally said, I didn't know whether I believed in God or not at that point in time. And I said, but if you're up there, all I want is inner peace.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a plea for help. First time I think I turned it over to somebody else because I always thought I could solve my own problems.
Yeah.
But obviously, we can't always do that. But the very next day, I go to the bookstore expecting to buy a novel, a book on tape then.
Yeah.
And I was going to a meeting, a stressful meeting with my business partner. And we needed to negotiate some really sensitive matters.
Yeah, I know that
And
feeling.
I was so, and I wanted to be right about everything. So I was so stressed out. And in this bookstore, going through the rack, looking at books on tape, and I came across this book about love and fear.
Yeah.
So I listened to it on tape, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden I could feel myself begin to relax. So I gave it to my partner, and he did the same thing.
Yeah.
And we came to the meeting, and we had the best meeting we ever had. I mean, I
Wow.
can't say things were perfect forever,
Yeah.
but it really helped.
Yeah.
And I started using it, the principles that I learned about love and fear in my entire life.
Yeah.
So let me explain a little bit if that's fine with you. I found out that we always want to operate from an area of love because if you stop and think about it, what does that mean? That means you're going to be peaceful, you're going to sleep well, you're going to have great relationships, you're probably going to be successful in interacting with other people. What's the opposite? The opposite is fear. What does fear bring? Fear brings anger, guilt, judgment, insomnia, stress, illness, and they're mutually exclusive. I like to think of them as a line graph. So if you have love over on this side, and then you have fear on this side, we're probably most of the time operating somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to operate in this love fear as much as you can.
Yeah.
So it taught me that people in reality, we all want love, but we often don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And so whenever we see angry people, we should stop and say, they're not loving, so they must be fearful. What could they possibly be fearful? And the very next day or so, I took that to the office and let me explain. At that time, I was a very busy surgeon doing it every day. And my typical schedule was new patient at 8 o'clock, start the next surgery at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I'd come into the office and I wasn't always perfectly on time. I would look through my mail for a few minutes,
Yeah.
thinking my assistant would be in the room interviewing the patient and getting some history down recorded. And she comes running in and said, "Dr. Sottosanti, you're 10 minutes late." And I said, "Well, I thought you were in there, talking to the patient." "Well, he won't talk to me," she said. "He's up out of the chair. He's mad. He says you're late. He's an important businessman, and he says he's going to leave if I'm not there in a few minutes." And what I thought of was, in the past, I would have said to her, "Look, Julie, I'm booked out for a month solid.
Yeah.
I don't need angry patients in
Yeah.
my
Let him
life.
go.
Let them go." The very next day, after thinking about the love fear dynamic, I said to myself, let's call him Mr. Jones. I wonder what Mr. Jones is fearful of. Is he fearful that I'm going to cause pain with the
Yeah.
surgery? Is he afraid that he doesn't have the money to pay for it?
Yeah.
Is he going to miss work and be subject to potential problems there? And so all of a sudden, I began feeling sorry for Mr. Jones before I ever met Mr. Jones.
Yeah.
So in the past, again, Mr. Jones would have been gone. Mr.
Yeah.
Jones not only would have been gone, he would have written me a bad review. He would have told his referrals, my referral source who referred him, that I'm a terrible person. So a total lose-lose situation.
Well,
So I
you've
go
touched on
walking
so
into
much here, and I want to just stop for a second, put a pin in a
yeah,
couple of things for our listeners out there. And I don't know how many of you noticed as well, but it's interesting. Normally, when we talk about love and we think of the other side of love, people immediately assume love and hate. And I really want to put a pin in that, Dr. John here is suggesting the opposite of love isn't that hate, it's love. And the counterpoint to that is fear. And I love how you described the scenario you just described when you'd say it, all of a sudden I started feeling sorry for him. That's that empathy, right? And these are at the core of effective negotiations. And in fact, one of my models, I call it the no fear model, about like tapping into with intention before you sit down. And for our listeners, to negotiate any negotiation, personally, professionally, all the spaces in between. Think about what are the fears that the other party's bringing to the table? What are the fears that I'm bringing to the table? And I just want to say, Dr. John, your story about how you came there so resonates with me. In fact, it's one of the reasons I started the art of feminine negotiation, because we do define success based on that very competitive, driven, that striver, driver, achiever moving forward. And gosh, in my law practice, I was there. I mean, bragging about having hearings 5 days back to back in a row. And at what cost? So I just wanted to take a little step back, because I often say that negotiating our mindset is our first and most important negotiation. I'd love if you could share what advice you have for us on negotiating our mindset to kickstart this process to show up more powerfully.
if you just automatically ask the question, what is this person fearful of?
Yeah.
Because it can show up in all kinds of situations.
Yeah.
And we can try to see their side of the story. Don't be so entrenched in I'm right. And
Yeah.
what happened in this particular situation is I walk into the room and I immediately apologize, which I never would have before. That was huge.
Yeah.
I said, "Mr. Jones, I apologize. I had came in and a doctor called me. There's a little white lie here, I think, and I had to be on the phone, and I'm sorry. And I realize you have to leave. So what I would like to offer you is, I know you have to leave in a few minutes." I said, "I'd like to offer you a no charge appointment. I would like to look at your X-rays and just give you an idea of what's going on." And so I did that. He said yes, and I looked at his X-rays and I said, "Well, I can see a small to moderate problem, something that needs something done."
Yeah.
I said, "But to really tell you the exact amount of treatment," I said, "I have to have you back, and it'll take me at least 30 to 40 minutes to make measurements and to tell you exactly what needs to be done. So we'll reschedule you for that appointment. And I want to remind you, there's no charge for today." Now, invariably, Mr. Jones and people like him would say, "No, go right ahead."
Yeah. Yeah.
once they got to like me, it'd be go right ahead, finish the exam.
Yeah,
And they would go out to the front desk and sign up for the surgical procedure and usually go through with it. And they turned out to be my best patients because
absolutely.
I dealt with their anger.
Yeah.
I just didn't dig in my heels.
Yeah, it's so important and it's such a simple concept and it is overlooked so often. So I love that you really dig into this. And what role do you think fear, I mean, you've touched on it, I think, but what role does fear play in sabotaging negotiations if they're not addressed?
Oh, it's terrible because what ends up happening is, everything gets tense and tight, and you make these moves, and the other person, they see it as an antagonistic move, even though you didn't mean it that way. And it's almost like a chess game.
Yeah,
You make a move, they've got to analyze the reasons you made the move, and they've got to come back and make their move.
yeah,
And the whole thing could be so tense.
yeah,
And it really doesn't have to be. It
yeah.
can be meet somewhere in the middle. Sometimes it's closer to your side of the story, and other times it's closer to theirs. But then the dynamic is so much more comfortable. Life is
Yes.
short.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And gosh, these days where things so polarized, we need to bring a little more love to the world. Now, you had mentioned before, and I love that you're so transparent about it. It's like, I would have wanted to be right before, and I certainly can relate to that. So let's talk for a minute about like how does pride or that ego, I often talk about the importance of surrendering ego to get better outcomes. How do you think pride hurts our ability to negotiate or get those best outcomes?
Let me give you a little example. Besides treating patients, I lectured a lot for the University of Southern California and other organizations. I was giving a course in Vail, Colorado at a five-star hotel. And the reason for this was they would hold the courses there for tax deductions. So I would lecture, I hate to
Yeah.
say this, I'd lecture from 7 to 9 in the morning, and
Yeah.
they would be eating breakfast while I'm talking. And then I'd lecture from 4 to 6 in the afternoon, and they'd be drinking cocktails.
Of course.
So you're competing against their conversation with each other and all the food
Yeah.
and the drink. And I'm giving this talk, and I'm holding I'm holding projector controls and I'm holding a slide pointer and I'm juggling all this stuff. And I also just got a prescription for my first well, no, that was reading glasses. So it wasn't
Yeah.
even prescription, but I'm juggling reading glasses because I wasn't used to having glasses on.
Yeah.
And finally, I wasn't breaking through. There is, there's no doubt in my mind, they were a little bit bored.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit stiff. Then I dropped everything and I had to pick everything up. And I finally said, I looked at the crowd and I said, have any of you reached the point when you had to start wearing glasses and you didn't even know how to handle them?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, my demeanor changed. Everybody started looking at me, and
Yeah.
I gave the best lecture. I mean, they laughed and they cried and
Yeah.
they applauded, and it was just a fantastic lecture. And that was total vulnerability. And
I
I know
love
you know
that.
all about that.
Yeah. Well, and let me put a pin in that again for our listeners, because we are so conditioned and taught from quite a young age to believe that, effective negotiators, the great business leaders are people who hold their cards close to your chest, always don't show. And in fact, the opposite is true. So I love that you really called that out. It's vulnerability. When you can show up and be a little bit more vulnerable, it triggers that reciprocity. And then it's a
It
whole
really does.
a whole host of other opportunities open up for us. And I've read somewhere, I think in your material, you talk about how love and fear cannot coexist. Tell us a little bit about that piece of the love fear dynamic.
They really can. In fact, I think I couldn't tell you where because I'm not the type of person that can quote scripture, but
Yeah.
somewhere it says, "Love casts out all fear."
Oh, yeah.
Fear. So that has been known for a good 1,000 years or more.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, sometimes these old principles, like things that came from Aristotle,
Yeah.
can really teach us a lot. But
Yeah.
you can't operate out of both places. So you might as well, the first thing you have to do if you really want to take a fearful person and bring them more to the love side is if you're angry at them because of something they did, you've got to forgive them.
Yeah.
You can't hold blame.
Yeah.
You got to get rid of all that shameful, I mean, not shameful necessarily, although that may be involved. You have to get rid of the blame.
Yeah.
I had a young man who we were thinking about bringing into the business, and something very unusual happened. I had a partnership, so there were two of us, and he was the third man.
Yeah.
and we were expanding rapidly, and we needed a much bigger facility. So we did some foolish things. We signed the lease without having an ironclad agreement by him. But
Yeah.
sometimes surgeons, we just kind of trust people,
Yeah.
and we signed with the contractor, we signed the
Yeah.
lease, we did all kinds of things, and we're all ready to move ahead. And he comes in and says, I've decided to not move in with you guys. I'm going to stay in the old building. He had been negotiating with the previous
Wow.
owner, stayed, and he'd been catering to the staff, bringing them
Oh,
flowers and candy, took a bunch of the staff, took patient charts. It was a nightmare.
that is a
It took me
nightmare.
forever to forgive him, but he and I are now best friends.
Oh,
And it's
wow.
really, we play golf together. It took
Oh.
25 years
Yeah.
to forgive him.
Sometimes that
That's how
forgiveness is
mad
a
I
while
was.
coming.
So it doesn't come easy, but
Yeah.
I didn't know a lot of the things that I now know. I think I would have, if I knew it all, I would have forgiven him 20 years ago,
Oh,
25 years.
that's lovely. Now, you've mentioned Aristotle, and I know that you credit him with sort of the initiation or the impetus for some of this. So tell us how and why is Aristotle such an inspiration for you in this new venture?
My dad was born in Italy, and he came over and he was only 6 years old. And he really felt some anti-Italian prejudice because
Yeah.
he came from Sicily,
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of money, didn't speak English. They worked construction. He had to take his little wagon and pull it along the railroad tracks at age 7 in Connecticut in order to have coal, to get coal and bring it home so they could heat the house.
Wow.
Otherwise, they would have frozen in the wintertime. So he said to me, John, you have to study hard. And then he'd say, become a doctor because they
Yeah.
make lots of money. That was his two big things: become a doctor and make money.
Yeah.
So here I am, listening to dad, and he felt pretty strongly about it. So by the age of 41, I had worked hard. I built a big business. I had other side businesses going. I had
Yeah.
just lots of things. I think I told you about my patents, and I had royalties eventually and things coming
Nice.
in from medicine. And it was just I had a lot of balls in the air, and I
Yeah.
was throwing them up, and just stressing myself out. But so I had it all by most standards. I mean, I had a big house
Yeah.
overlooking the ocean in La Jolla, California,
Oh,
which is the
wow.
Beverly Hills of San Diego.
Oh my God.
And I'm looking down at La Jolla Shores Beach. I could see the white water hit the sand, and I could hear the waves somewhat reverberate through the house. I
Yeah.
mean, it was like where you want to go on vacation, and I was living there.
Yeah.
And then I didn't want my patients to see me driving just say a Ford or a Chevy. So I went out and bought a Mercedes
Yeah.
Benz sedan, extended length type of thing. And, and then I traveled all over, and USC paid for it. I mean, I even lectured in Tahiti and Fiji,
Wow.
if you could imagine,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
all over. And you'd think I'd be so happy because that's what everybody wants. So they want
Yeah.
titles, they want prestige, they want
Yeah.
power. I had it all.
Yeah.
I wasn't happy. And I had a nice family. I had a wonderful wife, still do.
Yeah.
We've been married a long time.
Yeah.
And I have 3 kids and some grandkids. So I had what everybody said should make you happy, but I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
And if you understand Aristotle, Aristotle talks about the 4 levels. Well, the first level is pretty shallow, but I see a lot of people talk like that. For instance, I was watching a TED talk, and this man got up and he said, I'm really happy. You already have 12 minutes, 18. Now, we used to have 18 minutes. I think it's 12 minutes. So you got to get
Yeah.
your point across. I'm really happy. And the reason that I'm happy is that I have set this goal where I'm going to visit 20 countries in the next 4 years. And I thought, that's not going to make you happy.
Yeah.
I visited 20 countries in 4 years. I didn't make me happy. But that's, the lowest level happiness is immediate gratification.
Okay.
A very shallow form would be, oh, I love chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream cones. And every once in a while, even though I'm lactose intolerant, I'll sneak into Baskin and Robbins and
Yeah.
buy one. And oh, I just for about 10 minutes, I am so happy. And then I'm not happy anymore.
Yeah.
Or my favorite team wins a game
Yeah.
and I'm so happy. And then the next night they lose,
Yeah.
and then what are you not happy? So that's level one, very shallow. And yet, a lot of happiness coaches, that's all they teach you.
Yeah.
They
That's
teach you
true.
things like that. You
Yeah.
know, hang around happy people. I mean, that's okay too. I mean, true, but you've got to find something more substantial. So you can move up to level 2.
Well, and what's
Level
that,
two
just
is
before you do that, because that
sure.
really struck a chord with me, because I'm just picturing as you're saying that, John, about like social media and so much of the influences in our life now, all of the advertising that we see, almost all of it is targeted to that instant gratification as opposed to that kind of longer, deeper one.
I
So
know.
So I want to just maybe invite our listeners there to really pay attention to these four levels of happiness and be thinking about where you fall on this spectrum as John is taking us through
Right.
this. So go
And
ahead.
it all depends. If you talk about Facebook, for instance, that's my two main social platforms are Facebook and well, not so much Instagram, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And they're very different. I mean, Facebook is very
Yeah.
much warm, fuzzy family type
Yeah.
things, and then people love little kids running around. But then on LinkedIn, they really ignore you because they really want is how do you take all this information into the business place?
Yeah,
And if
that's
you don't
true.
feed them information on how to improve your business, they won't
Yeah.
even listen to you. They'll never pay any attention to you at all. So that's really interesting, and it's shallow in its own way
Yes.
in reality. What you really want is those deep relationships, et cetera. So I don't spend a lot of time on social media per se,
Yeah.
but I think that relationships and feeling comfortable with people, in this love fear dynamic, it works in so many different ways.
Yeah.
How many times have you been driving along, or any of our listeners, think about somebody cutting you off?
Yeah.
You just leave a little bit of space and they dart out,
It's
just
true.
hoping you step on the brakes. And if you
Yeah.
don't step on the brakes and you hit them, it's probably your fault for
Yeah.
not keeping your eyes out for them. So now what I do immediately when that happens is I say, I wonder what they're fearful for. I wonder if they're going to the hospital.
Yeah.
I
I
wonder if
love
their
that.
wife just called them and said she's leaving, you know,
Yes.
and I start feeling sorry for them. And no
Yes.
longer do I come home upset and tense and mad.
Yeah.
And the real goal is sustained happiness, which I like to call joy.
Yeah.
And joy and happiness are very related. But, you'll never, and I'm not trying to say that's where I am all the time. I certainly can have my difficult times. I had one this
Yeah.
morning.
Oh,
I'll just briefly tell you about it. Well, I'm planning a family reunion for 20 people,
yeah.
and we're able to find this house in Vermont with 14 rooms. And
Nice.
I'm trying to distribute the rooms so everybody feels comfortable.
Good
Boy, is
luck.
that very difficult to do. I'm using all my negotiating skills that I might
Absolutely.
possibly have.
Well, and I love
Yeah,
that
so
you recognize these things as negotiations. Most people don't, I find. They don't think of these interactions.
you've
And I
been
want
my
you to
help too.
yeah.
No,
Well, I want
really,
you to take
I've
us
read your book. Yeah,
well,
it's great.
thank
You
you.
have you have a great book. I'm gonna
Well, thanks.
really
Likewise, I
applaud it.
appreciate
Really.
that very much. And I want to make sure you get to take us through the four levels of happiness and
Yeah.
how we get to the top. Although I want to circle back as well, because again, something that you said really resonated when you talked about if somebody cuts you off and thinking about coming from that place of empathy. That struck me more. My dad died of a heart attack at only 52 years old, so it was
Oh,
rocked my world, right, just at the time,
sure.
and I had that epiphany, John, on the way to the hospital because I got the call at 5:30 in the morning. They didn't tell us he'd already passed, but they said there's been a turn for the worse, which I now know means they're already gone, but did not at the
Right.
time, so I'm furiously
No.
trying to get to the hospital across town, and looking at the rest of the world sort of just going about their business and I thought, gosh, I am going to forever see things differently now and imagine you don't know what people are going through in their lives. So I love that insight that you share. Okay, so you gave us level 1 of happiness, the more superficial if I can
Okay.
call it that. Where do we go from there?
Yeah. Level two, I call achievement level. It's
Yep.
where you set some goals. Like, let's say I want to go to college. So
Yep.
you go ahead and you work hard in high school and get good grades. You get good SATs. You go to college, and then you want a good job. And you said all these things. You want to buy your first house.
Yeah.
You want to buy your car. Those are all really good things. Another thing, though, you have to think about too is the competition. Okay, you buy a house, especially in the area I live in, where some houses have views and some don't. It's like that my house was so nice, but the house up above it had a better view. And he got mad when I redid or remodeled my house and I made my chimney a little bit higher because of
Yeah.
the code. I had to.
Yeah.
And he said it hurt his view a little bit. And
Yeah.
he actually had me come up on his patio looking out, and sure enough, my chimney was a little higher, and it broke the line where
Oh,
the sky meets the ocean. Oh,
yeah.
was he mad? And that's a shame. What was he fearful of? I don't know.
Yeah.
That he wouldn't have the best house around, I guess.
Yeah,
So
comparator is a
there's
definite.
yeah, so there's so much comparison. Take someone who really works hard at tennis,
Yeah,
and they practice and practice 4 hours a day, 365 days a year, and they finally start winning, and they go ahead and win the tennis tournament, and that's wonderful. But
yeah,
somebody loses.
yeah,
It's always competition,
yeah.
and you're going to lose sooner or later.
I was gonna say
Well,
that's that in that moment, right? So,
in
yeah,
that moment, you glorify the moment, but what
yeah.
happens? So it's good in itself, but
Okay.
it ideally you move into the third level, which in really is the compassionate level. Now, I don't want to give Aristotle all the credit. Philosopher Thomas Aquinas wrote about the
Yeah,
happiness levels, and Robert Spitzer has a book out on the four levels of happiness. That's fairly good too. And they all have their benefits, but Aristotle started it all. There's no
yeah,
doubt about it. He saw
yeah,
it. And the compassionate level, you start doing things for other people without remuneration for
yeah.
yourself.
Nice.
Donate your time. Go work at a food kitchen. One of the best experiences I ever had was we have a very large homeless shelter in San Diego, and where you're serving dinner to 400 people every night is dinner. So you just
Yeah,
volunteer, for occasional nights, but they have a good list and a lot of people volunteer. But you're standing out there, and they're coming down with their plates. I was working the salad bar one night, and we only had a limited number of tomatoes, and the guy kept saying, "Give me more tomatoes, give me more tomatoes," and I was running out of tomatoes, and I felt sorry for the guys behind him and the poor people behind him because I wouldn't want to use all the tomatoes. But that type of thing takes stress
yeah,
off your
yeah,
life because we
yeah,
worry about our lives and getting the best that we can. And here are these people that have nothing.
yeah, yeah.
You
Okay, so
know,
let's see. We've got instant gratification. Then you go up to your next level, and now we're at compassion. And what's the fourth one?
transcendence.
Ah,
It's a hard level, and it's described differently for everybody.
yeah,
Aristotle talked a lot about it. He talked about virtue. I think understanding and having a sense of what is really truth
yeah,
and beauty. And
yeah,
today it's really hard to know what truth is,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
And beauty,
Oh,
et cetera.
oh my gosh. Yes.
It's a difficult time.
Yeah.
And then Viktor Frankl has a book out called Man's Search for Meaning,
Yeah.
in which he was in a concentration camp and a lot of people were dying around him. But he noticed that in this terrible environment where he had no control at all, some
Yeah.
people were happy.
Yeah.
They were giving their food away to people that were really hurting.
Yeah.
So he analyzed that and wrote a wonderful book on it. So he talked about existential vacuum, that if you don't have meaning in your life, you actually have a hole in your soul, in your life. That's a difficult term to deal with.
Yeah.
Not everybody understands it well, and none of us can exactly what it is, but there's a hole in it in your heart, he said, and it's got to be filled with something. And a lot of times it gets filled with addictions. That's why the
Yeah.
book I wrote called Mortal Adhesions. Well,
Yeah.
what are the adhesions? Well, it's a surgical term, so I threw it in there for that reason. And as a surgical term, it's something that people get after surgery sometime. It's a complication of surgery. It causes pain.
Yeah.
Well, we mortal individuals have our own adhesions,
Yeah.
but they tend to be addictions, and a
That's
lot of
right.
them, if not many of them, are negative ones.
Yeah.
I think they're detractors of happiness.
Yeah.
I mean, one might be alcohol, one
Yeah.
might be drugs, which
Yeah.
is a terrible thing that we're dealing with
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other things like ego. You wrote something on the seven deadly sins of
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed you have
negotiation.
that as
See that?
well, which I loved.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to throw that. I threw that on a subtitle of my book. Because people are going to say, what the heck what are these things called adhesions? So adhesions are a metaphor for addictions. So
Yeah.
we're all addicted to stuff.
Yeah.
And if it's not drugs and alcohol and things like that, it's pride,
Yeah.
or it's anger,
Yeah.
or it's some of the things like things we shouldn't get into. Take one of the seven deadly sins is lust. A lot of
Yeah.
people get into porn today. It
Yeah.
ruins marriages. So there's so many negative
And
things.
circling back to the four levels, I was just thinking as you were going through them, my guess is that most people probably get stuck in that achievement phase where we're just always trying to go. So is that the case or
It is the case. And that's
okay.
why we have such a problem with all the addictions,
Yeah.
is because we're trying to fill that hole. We have no meaning in our life. And
Yeah.
that's where Frankel's book comes in.
Yeah. What do
I,
you think are
I,
the key skills or hallmarks that make for a great negotiator?
well, certainly is see the other side to a point. It doesn't mean that you're a weak person or that you
Yeah.
have to give everything away. But in particular, in a situation when you're negotiating with someone who you're going to have to negotiate with again, it doesn't hurt to give a little bit away in the beginning, and it comes back to you
Yeah.
a lot of the times.
Yeah.
It really does. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, know your goals, go into the negotiation. You're the best at it. Buy Cindy's book is what I'm going to say, because you have so many.
Nice
I'm supposed to be
plug.
pushing Cindy. I'm supposed to be pushing my book. Can you see it behind me?
I love that. And actually, speaking of your book, and I'm glad you told us one because I was going to ask you about the title. It's an unusual one. So thank you for sharing what's behind that. What was one of the most surprising things that you discovered while either researching or writing your book, John?
Yeah, well, that's tough. One of the things that's difficult to do is to come out and tell the whole story about things. A lot of people say to myself, I can't believe you told people you did all those crazy things. But it's my story. And why I wrote it was that people today are hungry for happiness.
Yeah.
But I think they're finding it or going after it in all the wrong places, or a lot of
Yes.
the wrong places.
Yeah.
And I really do think the principles of Aristotle, Aquinas, and Spitzer
Yeah.
really are where it's at. And so I wanted to teach that. And one of the things that hit me, that changed my life, is one little phrase. John, would you rather be happy or would you rather be right?
That's so true. That's so
I
true.
think that saved my marriage.
You and
You
many
know,
others, and sadly, many who have learned the hard way that they wish they'd gotten that earlier. Well,
you
John, this
just
has
can't.
been great. I can't believe
You,
how quickly our time has gone by here.
well,
You've just got just so many golden gems to share with us. I normally like by ending by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to be on this issue, just anything where you see things differently. What would you say that was for you?
yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with being right. But I'd have to say it stands out right away
Yeah.
because I always wanted to be right. I
Yeah.
don't. I think it comes from the time when we're a little child sometimes, and
Yeah.
people give us a hard time. I can remember all the embarrassing things that happened to me as a child. So now I always want to be right. Now that I have the money, power, knowledge, and position, etc., I want to be right,
Yeah.
but I can't be. And when I learned that, all the time, but I believe in success. I mean, I'm not saying be a wimp and let
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
walk
Yeah.
all over you. You know, be a good negotiator. But that's really meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Go
Well,
ahead.
one of the things I was thinking about is, I do have a website, mortaladhesions.com. If people go to it, some of the things we're talking about today, if they go to the comments section and if
Yeah.
they put your name in, I'll know the program I was on, Cindy Watson.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the comments section and send it to me, and I'll send him kind of a transcript of things that I talked about today,
Oh,
and and
beautiful.
and then yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
I love that. And yeah, and we'll make sure we'll talk to make sure we get that in the show notes. And I think that's a beautiful mindset shift as well. And ironically, because you've said a couple of times about because people do think, oh, well, that's a weakness. You don't want to show up. But the opposite is true. Like you said, when you let go of that need to be right and you can show up with curiosity, right? I mean, I call it the art of curiosity. It's an art, just ask questions, listen more than you talk, and I totally agree with you, John. It is a game changer. And again, for our listeners, really tying up that love fear dynamic is such a, as soon as I had the opportunity to meet Johnny frame that, it encapsulates so much of the principles that I talk about and how to be a better negotiator, right? So I encourage you to check out the book.
Borrow it. You can borrow it.
Absolutely. Mortal Adhesions, check it out. And where can people learn more about you? Where do you want us
But
to send them?
mortaladhesions.com is the easiest thing possible because I talk about my book in there, and they can go to Amazon off that site.
Perfect.
And then if they go to the contacts, because about 5 or 6 things they click on, they go to the contacts page, my email, personal email address is on there. So they can
Generous.
go ahead and actually email me directly, or they can fill in the comments thing and write your name, and I'll remember what we talked about today. And I'll have about 2 or 3 pages worth of stuff regarding the 4 levels of happiness.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Thank you. Very generous.
Thank
And
you for
thank
having
you
me.
so much for joining us here today, John. It's just been loads of really valuable insights and perspective shifts that I think will be a gift for all of our listeners out there. So thank you.
My pleasure, Cindy. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, and you too. And for our listeners, I'm sure you really got lots out of this episode. We covered a wide, from philosophy to negotiation to the search for happiness and peace in life, which goodness knows we could all use a little more of. Give the gift of sharing. Make sure to share this episode with other people. Share the information about Dr. John and the work that he does as well. And before we sign off today, just want to share some ways that we can work together. If you are looking to negotiate a better life, I have everything from online to group to my signature VIP and mastermind experiences so that you can better leverage that innate natural power that you already have. And maybe you're not even aware of it, to be able to get more of what you want and deserve in life, both for yourself and for the others you come in contact with. And if that sounds interesting, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. Make sure to grab a copy of my book of the same name, Art of Feminine Negotiation, if you haven't done that. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.